Hello and welcome to another reaction video. We're going to take a look at the D&D's release video for Druids and the Circle of the Moon, and we are going to see what we think about it. I haven't seen this video yet, so this will be my own opinion and reactions. If you disagree with anything I say, please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear about it. So without further ado, let's get into the video.
Hello everyone, I'm here with Jeremy Crawford and we are going to be talking about some really cool new things with the Druid and also the Circle of the Moon, and especially wild shape. So I think people will be very happy.
There is a lot to explore in the forest that is the Druid.
Yes.
We are going to take this speed up a little bit. That last video got a little long, so let's set the playback speed to 1.5, and I hope that we can still understand everything.
One of the biggest things for people to play with, ponder, test, discuss, and that is the new form of wild shape. Wild shape in the version of the Druid in this Unearthed Arcana now is available at first level. We view it as iconic to the Druid.
Right.
Previously, the Druid at first level got simply, the usual array of proficiencies and spellcasting and the Druidic language.
Right.
We felt the starting step for the Druid needed a little more oomph and needed that iconic piece of the class, wild shape. So it's not only now at first level, but it is now a part of a feature called Channel Nature. And Channel Nature is the Druid's answer to the Cleric and Paladin's Channel Divinity. The three of them are in a class group together. They are the priests. They are the classes that are drawing on the sort of divine and primal forces of the cosmos. And the main way that the Druid can use Channel Nature to begin with is wild shape. But the Druid is going.
Okay, so that's interesting. I haven't seen the Paladin one either. I would guess then, based on what he's saying, that we'll probably get a channel might or something, some sort of channel ability for the Paladin as well, maybe. That'll be a little different than the Cleric or the Druid. Let's see what else they say about it here.
Going to get more ways to use Channel Nature at higher levels. So before I delve into all the neat ins and outs of wild shape, real quick, some of the other things that people are going to see in the Druid is that at second level, returning from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, where we introduced the ability to, previously it was called using one of your wild shape uses to summon a familiar.
Right.
That's now a Channel Nature use that you can use. And also you gain later the ability to use Channel Nature to summon up healing spectral flowers that can heal one or more people. We want Druids to have more that they can do with this part of their character, because as exciting as shapeshifting is, it's not appropriate for every scene, and we occasionally find that there are Druid players who pick the class far more to be a nature magician than a shapeshifter.
Right.
So
And that makes some sense to me, because I've always, when I think about a Druid, I don't think about shapeshifting. I mean, like, within the realm of Dungeons and Dragons, sure. But within the realm of, the real world where the Druid lore is drawn from, Druids, I mean, they could change shape, but that wasn't what a Druid was. A Druid was, a nature cleric, someone that, worked with the balance of nature. And so, having the main subclass be shape-shifting, and having that one being in 5th edition was so much more powerful than the other Druidic subclasses, I think kind of made the Druids not Druidic so much as like hybrid werewolves or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how they've changed some of that by adding all this stuff to the all these abilities to their nature ability. I think maybe that's a good direction. We'll see.
that we're always kind of balancing those two in this class.
And wild shape throughout the editions has grown more and more prominent, or like more beefy in D&D than it was initially envisioned, correct?
Originally, wild shape was not the core feature of the Druid. If you go all the way back to first edition D&D, it was certainly a cool feature of the Druid, and it was there, but it wasn't defining for who the Druid was. Whereas over time, as the game has grown, and as other games based on D&D have grown, shape-shifting has become a major part of the Druid's identity. Now, this also points at a thing that we are addressing in the Druid's design with some of the new material people are going to see here. And that is, in the last 8 years, as we've looked at player data, we have found that as beloved as the Druid is from a sentiment standpoint, in actual play, the Druid is the least played class in 5th edition of the classes that are in the player's handbook.
Right.
And a lot of
And that's interesting. One of my first characters was a Druid, though I was specializing in shapeshifting because, that's the most powerful kind of Druid. I could still do all the things, for the most part, that other Druids could do with spellcasting, but if I chose a different subclass, I wasn't as useful in combat to the rest of my party. But I could still be useful outside of combat, just like all the other Druids. So that's an interesting point, that there's fewer people play Druids than anything else. And I think part of that is because of the power level. I know a lot of people aren't concerned with the metagame aspect of D&D, but even if you are focused on stuff outside of the metagame and making the most powerful character, once you get into combat, which usually takes up a large portion of your adventure, feeling useless and secondary or to everybody else in the group never feels good. So
that can be boiled down to the complexity of Wild Shape. The 2014 version of Wild Shape requires the player to not only figure out how their class works, which every D&D player, that's a part of the fun of the game, is figuring out their class. They also need to figure out how to go diving into pools of stat blocks.
Yes, welcome to the Monster Manual, and you better understand your CR ratings.
Exactly. So. And that pool is a pool that is largely designed for dungeon masters.
Right.
Yeah, but the stat blocks aren't that complicated. I don't see that. Again, I'm much more into this than your standard casual person, or your standard casual player. But the stat blocks for beasts are so simple that, if you don't know what you're doing and your dungeon master gives you that stat block, it's not like that's difficult to use. And you could just, if your dungeon master gives you a list of, CR whatever creatures that you can change into, and you pick one and he gives you that stat block, it's not hard for anybody to understand. Somebody that doesn't even know how to play Dungeons and Dragons and has never played could be given the stat block of a beast and within 2 or 3 minutes be told how to use that character. So I don't buy that argument.
And so there are some fun things to be discovered in that pool. And many Druid players over the last 8 years have discovered fun animal options, either in the Monster Manual or in another book. But it's also just as easy to find an option that is not actually that effective.
Right, or not on theme with the Druid. I remember when Acquisitions Incorporated, the book came out, and they listed a giant tentacle as a beast. I'm like, this is not drill, Druids. You can be a tentacle now. I was very excited. I was like, rules is written, I can be a tentacle now. It's very important.
And so one of our design goals with this new Wild Shape is to make it exciting and also easy to use. And so what people are now going to see here is, rather than needing to go somewhere else to find the forms that you turn into, we have provided the forms in the class itself. You're going to find when you go through that there is the animal of the land, the animal of the sky, and the animal of the sea. This triadic structure will be familiar to anyone who has been playing the Beastmaster from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, where there are also 3 beast options, one of the land, one of the sea, and one of the sky. So we've now taken a very similar approach to create 3 stat blocks for the Druid, but there's a really critical difference between what we did in the Beastmaster in Tasha's Cauldron and what we're doing for the Druid here. Because in Tasha's Cauldron, that Beastmaster was finding a beast companion. In the Druid, the form you adopt is you. And so you assume this stat block. And what was really fun to do in these new stat blocks is actually tie them to the Druid. And so when you go into these different...
So are they saying that you don't get to choose to turn into, say, a bear or a wolf or a badger? You don't get to change into those specific animals. You have a set stat block, and then you just flavor it to look however you want. Because I think that takes away a lot of the flavor, a lot of the abilities of the shape change. If that's what he's getting ready to say, that the stat block for all land animals is the same. You change into a badger because you want to burrow. You change into a wolf because you want to trip somebody. Otherwise, you could just be an amorphous beast, and it makes no difference what you change into. And that, if that's what he's getting ready to say, that's a thumbs down vote for me for that part.
Different forms, the number of the stats are going to scale with you. And that means a number of these forms will essentially keep growing with you over the course of your career as a druid. And then you're going to decide, do you want the advantages of the land animal, which is a bit more resilient than, say, the flying animal, but who can then fly, or the aquatic animal who can breathe underwater. Just as in the 2014 Player's Handbook, the aquatic and aerial forms come at higher levels, because in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you're not allowed to take an aquatic beast or a flying beast until you're a higher level druid. That's still true here. The difference is now the stat block that you adopt, even at first level, already is going to have some of you as a druid in it. Your wisdom score, for instance, is going to determine a number of that form's stats. You also get to decide what exactly the type of animal is. You decide, are you appearing as a bear? Are you appearing as a panther, a velociraptor, or something else? You also, as you level up in this class, are going to find ways that you can enhance your wild shape.
But it still doesn't sound like your stats change. So it's just what you look like. So as a bear, I would do the same amount of damage as a badger. And as a badger, I wouldn't be able to burrow. As a, it sounds like it's just going to be one generic stat block. That is unappealing to me.
At higher levels, you're going to gain the ability to become tiny for a limited amount of time.
Oh, awesome.
You also are going to, at higher levels, gain the ability to alternate between your normal form and your wild shape form without expending uses of wild shape. So if you're a druid player, you've ever wanted to be able to sort of fly in as a bird, pop into your humanoid form just for a moment, and then pop back into a bird without having to use an additional use of wild shape, well, in this new version of the class at high level, you will gain that ability to alternate. You also, when you reach 5th level, and this is for all druids, not just Circle of the Moon, you will unlock some power-ups in even your base animal form. You will unlock the multi-attack of the animal of the land. You will be able to access climb speed so that you can crawl up, all over walls. So there's a lot of juicy growth that goes on there.
But is that tied to the animal?
Forms that you adopt are customizable in terms of their appearance. Their stats change with you. And then you also have these other channel nature options to heal people, to call a familiar, to assist you. And also eventually, you're even going to gain the ability of, when you wild shape, to also use the Healing Blossoms option of channel nature, so that when you transform, you can also heal people or yourself around you. So the druid has gotten a lot of really nice new abilities that are integrated together to try to not only make wild shape, this iconic feature of the class, better integrated into the class, but also better integrated with the class's broader identity of also being a nature magician, also being a healer. We wanted to make sure that these different sides of the class, again, were tied together a bit better.
And heavily tied to your own character's story, because you can now, I always wanted to play a creepy druid. I only wanted to turn into a bat, or a spider, or a wolf, or maybe something even gross, something a little bit more venomous, where you're like this kind of corrupted like animal creature, but different versions of it, one that has wings, one that can swim, all of that. And now you can make that part of your story. I mean, there's an entire movie where someone turns into an owlbear. You can look like an owlbear now.
Absolutely, because we even put into this new version that your form can be a hybrid form that has characteristics of different animals, like an owl and a bear. Because we also have seen over the years exactly what you just described. There are druid.
I wonder if part of the design intent was to placate everybody that was throwing a fit about, you can't turn into a owlbear, from all the previews from the D&D movie. But again, you can turn into an owlbear, but you don't have any of the abilities of an owlbear, it doesn't sound like. So, are you really an owlbear? Not really.
Players who want to shapeshift, but they have one thing they want to shapeshift into.
Right.
They want to be a bear, or they want to be a squirrel, and maybe once in a while something else, and don't want to feel like they have to choose a form because it happens to have an enticing stat block. Instead, now you have stat blocks tailor-made for you as a druid, and you decide what the creature looks like.
So we've got pretty beefy wild shape on top of everything else.
You decide what you look like, but the whole point of that, you don't have to try to pick a specific animal to get an ability. But now you have no way to gain any of those abilities because you have a generic stat block. I know I'm beating a dead horse, which once you do should turn back into the druid.
else, but now we also have the Circle of the Moon, which I expect is going to up the ante a bit.
So Circle of the Moon, we are presenting here as iconic subclass for the Druid because it's all about wild shape. And there is several things that people will be familiar with, and this is the pattern that has been the case in this playtest. Like old friends return from the designs, and then potential new friends show up. So an example of old friends who return, Circle of the Moon Druids can pop into their wild shape form as a bonus action, just like before. They before could spend a spell slot to heal themselves. We have decided to amp that up a little bit. Circle of the Moon Druids can now instead, while in their wild shape form, cast abjuration spells that they have prepared.
Yeah.
So people have noticed in the playtest that we've been changing healing spells almost entirely across the board into abjuration spells. So before, yes, the Circle of the Moon Druid could do this sort of generalized healing by burning a spell slot. Well, now you can spend that spell slot on an actual spell to heal yourself or use some other protective magic that you might have prepared while you're in wild shape. We've also done something that I'm very curious to see how people are going to receive it. We no longer have the ability to turn into the elementals from the monster manual.
Okay.
We know that's going to be a painful, painful loss for some people. We did this because we wanted to integrate the subclass with itself better. We wanted it to be much more about, this is the subclass that is all about beefing up wild shape itself. And so now what we've done is, rather than assuming one of those elemental forms from the monster manual, instead you confer elemental powers to your animal forms. So instead of becoming a fire elemental, you could become a fiery wolf. Instead of becoming an air elemental, you could become an owl that has thunder or lightning bristling around it. And when you make this choice, you gain resistance to a damage type that you select. And then later, you're also going to be able to deal with your attacks in any of your wild shape forms, deal that damage type with it. So if you're the fiery wolf, you can then eventually be dealing fire damage along with the other damage that you're doing with your bestial strike. And so again, this is all about integrating it with itself a bit better so that you don't have...
I mean, once you gained the elemental forms on the in the 5e version, I found that 80% of the time I was changing into those because they were more powerful. This is an interesting design choice to change it so that you aren't always changing into those. You're still changing into your animal forms, but you're incorporating some of the elemental energy into your forms. So that's kind of cool. I like that. That's gives you a little variety. You can change things up depending on the situation. Make sure you don't, choose electricity when you're fighting a shambling mound, but, maybe use, fire when you're going against something that's vulnerable to that. So, you could tailor it a little bit and still have whatever animal form you wanted to be.
Sort of this tangent option, but instead an option that beefs up your core option. And then we still have retained the ability to, once you reach the ultimate feature in the subclass, the ability to alter your form at will with the alter self spell.
So this can be like very pleasant and elemental and kind of Fey focused, or it could be the John Carpenter's The Thing. Like whatever you want to do, you can do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this. Plus, like if you want to turn into a phoenix, you're turning into a bird that's on fire. Like so you can add whatever flavor you want.
That again, like you're a phoenix, or you're a thunder wolf. Like that's what we're aiming for. With
maybe a thunder cat.
Evolution of the Circle of the Moon. And on top of it all, you're also going to be able to use unarmed strikes as a bonus action. So we might have overtuned it.
It's pretty tanky.
Yes.
Okay, so I liked some of the changes. I'll have to actually get in and take a look at the changes specifically within the playtest material. We'll go live here later today if the information is available, if the playtest information is available. Otherwise, whenever it is, we will. But we'll take a look at exactly how the mechanics work. It really sounded to me like they made the wild shapes very generic, and it's not until you get to higher levels where you have some variety, and that is only in the form of adding an elemental flavor to them. So if that is the case, I am not a big fan of the change to wild shape. Again, I don't think that stat blocks are so complicated that players can't figure out how to use them, no matter how casual or new they are. So I didn't find that to be a sticking point. But if they are generic stat blocks, then that really lowers the utility of the wild shapes and makes you focused just on, wild shape is just a avenue to a different kind of damage. Whereas before you could use the abilities of whatever it is that you're changing into as more of a utility thing outside of combat as well as within combat. So we'll take a look at that and check that out. So come back and see some of our videos later when we begin discussing that. All right, so that's going to do it for today. Until I see you again, keep on hacking the dungeon.